Don't touch the rifle. Just stand there and watch. The squad leader's command was ice cold, delivered in front of the sneering male cadets. The young woman stepped back, said nothing, but when the final target, a spinning coin in midair, made every marksman miss, she stepped forward, one shot, one hit, and the commanding general stood up, saluted in silence. Not a single word. Her name was Lan, 25 years old, twin braids, thin frame, glasses. Everyone mistook her for a logistics assistant, even though she was a military academy cadet. Every morning before dawn, Lan would clean the shooting range without being asked. She'd wipe down every training rifle by hand, organize ammunition, and sweep spent casings. The other cadets walked past her like she was invisible. Once she helped fold a fallen flag that had been knocked over by the wind. The response? Mockery. Cadets who haven't graduated shouldn't touch the colors. During break time, Lan was excluded from live-fire practice sessions. Your physical conditioning isn't up to standard. Just observe. When she offered to help set up targets, an officer snapped, "We don't need help. This is for real soldiers only." But Lan kept working quietly. She loaded ammunition, adjusted sights on discarded rifles, and maintained equipment that others ignored. The breaking point came during a demonstration shoot for the brigade commander. She was ordered to observe only. The best cadets lined up with pristine rifles and perfect uniforms. Lan stood at the back with the support staff, watching through chain-link fence. As the shooters prepared, she noticed something. The wind had shifted. The range flags were showing gusts from the northeast, but the shooters were compensating for northwest wind. Every single one of them. She almost spoke up. Almost, but the squad leader had made it clear. Observers stay silent. So she watched, and she waited. Before the first shooter took position, Lan whispered to a fellow cadet, "Just one accurate shot, and everything changes." The first marksman fired. Miss the second fired. Miss the third fired. Close, but no hit. Each shooter was using textbook technique, perfect stance, regulation breathing. But none of them had read the wind correctly. Lan knew why. They were shooting in ideal conditions during training, but real marksmanship, real precision, came from understanding variables that couldn't be taught in a classroom. As the fourth shooter prepared, Lan found herself gripping the fence harder. She knew exactly what adjustments were needed, exactly how to compensate for the crosswind, exactly where to aim. But she wasn't allowed to shoot. She wasn't even allowed to speak. So she just watched as one after another, the real soldiers missed their targets. Comments so unfair if you've ever seen good people treated badly. Despite being sidelined, Lan continued her quiet work. She maintained the old rifles that others had abandoned. Rifles with stuck triggers, damaged scopes, broken firing pins. Lan fixed them all by hand. A curious recruit once asked, "How do you know how to repair sniper rifles like a professional gunsmith?" Lan just smiled. "I learned from my father." Rumors began circulating. She failed the academy marksmanship test due to psychological pressure. "I heard her father was a legendary sniper who went missing during Operation Border 7. One night, a guard noticed Lan alone in the armory, adjusting scope optics by lighting matches and tracking the flames' movement in the wind. The young soldier whispered, "Where did you learn that technique?" Lan replied simply, "I've never missed reading the wind." Security cameras once captured Lan saving a male cadet from a jammed rifle that was about to misfire. But in the official report, he received credit for handling the malfunction. The whispers grew louder. Some cadets started watching her work. They noticed things. How she could estimate distance without a rangefinder. How she cleaned rifle barrels with a precision that improved accuracy. How she could predict wind patterns just by watching grass move. But the officers didn't notice. Or if they did, they didn't care. Then one day the brigade commander arrived for an unscheduled inspection. When he saw Lan, he stopped dead in his tracks. "You're Lieutenant Bao's daughter?" Lan nodded. The general stared at her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. Maybe regret. "Tomorrow you'll be on the firing line. No one is to exclude you anymore." That night, Lan cleaned her father's old rifle. It wasn't regulation. It was older, heavier, with manual adjustments instead of digital scopes. But it was the rifle that had made impossible shots in impossible conditions. She ran her fingers along the stock, feeling the wear marks from her father's hands. The rifle that had been returned to her family with a terse note, personal effects of missing personnel. But Lan knew something the Army had forgotten. This rifle had never missed when it mattered. Her father had taught her to shoot before she could properly hold the weapon. Marksmanship isn't about the equipment, he'd said. It's about understanding that every shot carries responsibility. She'd practiced in secret for years, in forests, on hills, at distances that would make veteran snipers nervous, not for glory, not for recognition, but because her father had taught her that precision was a form of respect, for the target, for the weapon, for the mission. And tomorrow, she'd finally have a chance to show what real marksmanship looked like. The other cadets had trained in perfect conditions with perfect equipment. Lan had learned to adapt to imperfection, to read conditions that others couldn't see, to make shots that others couldn't make. As she fell asleep that night, she thought about her father's last words to her. When your moment comes, don't hesitate. Some shots can't be taken twice. Tomorrow was her moment. Comment I was wrong if you've ever misjudged someone's abilities. The morning dawned clear and bright. The shooting range was packed with unit representatives, military journalists, and the brigade commander himself. 5 top cadets would participate in the live-fire challenge. The finale, hitting a spinning coin at 600 meters, rotated by drone. This wasn't just marksmanship. This was precision under pressure, the kind of shot that separated good shooters from legendary ones. The first shooter took position. Steady breathing, perfect form, fired. Missed the second shooter, adjusted for wind, controlled his heartbeat, squeezed the trigger smoothly. Missed the third shooter, used advanced ballistic calculations, compensated for humidity and air pressure. Missed the fourth shooter, the academy's top graduate, took extra time, checked and rechecked his scope, fired with absolute confidence, hit the edge of the coin, but not a clean separation. Not enough to pass the challenge. The fifth shooter didn't even come close. An officer announced, "Demonstration concluded." That's when footsteps echoed across the range. Lan walked forward, carrying her father's old rifle. No fancy scope, no digital assistance, just iron sights and 20 years of quiet training. The squad leader shouted, "I told you to observe only." But the general raised his hand. "Give her 1 round, and everyone stay silent." Lan said nothing. She adjusted her sling, took position. She didn't use the spotting scope, didn't check wind meters, just watched the grass, felt the air on her skin, and observed the coin's rotation pattern. This wasn't about proving herself anymore. This was about honoring her father's memory, about showing that his training, his sacrifice, his dedication had meant something. She breathed in slowly, let half the air out, found her natural respiratory pause. 1 second, 2 seconds. The rifle cracked. The cameras recorded everything in slow motion. The spinning coin split perfectly in half while rotating in midair. The range fell completely silent. Then the general did something unprecedented. He stood up and saluted her. Not the casual acknowledgement between ranks. A full military salute. The kind reserved for heroes. No one spoke. No one laughed. Just recognition that couldn't be denied. The general walked to Lan. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. "I served with your father. He was the only man who could hit night targets with mechanical sights from 900 meters. Lan reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a silver medal that had been returned after the war with a note. Insufficient verification. The general took the medal and pinned it to her uniform. Quietly, no press, no ceremony. "On behalf of a generation that made mistakes, I apologize." But there was more to this moment than anyone realized. Lieutenant Bao hadn't just been a good soldier. He'd been the sniper who had saved the general's unit during a night ambush 15 years ago. One shot in complete darkness had eliminated a threat that would have killed 20 men. The general had recommended him for the highest military honor, but politics, paperwork, and prejudice had buried the recommendation. Lieutenant Bao had died on a classified mission 6 months later. His service record was sealed. his contributions forgotten. Until now, standing before his daughter, watching her demonstrate the same impossible precision, the general realized something important. Legacy isn't just about recognition. It's about passing on excellence, teaching the next generation to exceed your standards. Lan had spent 15 years quietly perfecting skills that others thought were myths, not for fame, not for revenge, but because her father had taught her that true marksmanship was about responsibility. And when the moment came to demonstrate that responsibility, she was ready. The other cadets finally understood what they'd been witnessing all these months. Not a weak logistics assistant, a master marksman who had been hiding in plain sight. Comment, I owe someone if there's a person who helped you that you never properly thanked. Lan didn't request a transfer to the sniper division, didn't demand special treatment, didn't seek publicity. Instead, she started a small training program for young soldiers, teaching them to read wind, adjust for variables, and control their breathing. The same officer who had once yelled at her came to ask for lessons. Lan smiled and said nothing about the past. She taught using the old rifles she'd repaired by hand, the same way her father had taught her. A group of cadets painted a mural on the wall behind the shooting range. No names, just a simple inscription, "To the one who taught us to aim with our hearts." On the last day of the training cycle, Lan didn't appear for the graduation ceremony. She left only a note. If you've ever been underestimated, don't be angry, take aim, and let your actions speak for you. 3 months later, cadets started finding small improvements around the base. Targets that were perfectly calibrated, rifles that shot more accurately than before, wind flags positioned for optimal reading. Lan was still there, still working quietly, still making things better without asking for credit. A year later, a young female recruit arrived at the base. She was small, quiet, and wore glasses. The other soldiers started to dismiss her until they remembered the story. The story of the woman who was told just to watch, who was excluded from every opportunity, who was treated like she didn't matter, until the day she stepped forward with one shot and changed everything. Now when new soldiers arrive, the veterans tell them, watch carefully. The person you're ignoring might be the one who saves your life someday. Lan's father had taught her that precision was a form of respect, but she had learned something he couldn't have taught her. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is prove that quiet competence speaks louder than loud incompetence. She never became famous, never had her picture in military magazines, never received public recognition, but every soldier who trained at that base carried a piece of her lesson with them. Every cadet who learned to read wind properly, every marksman who understood that true accuracy comes from patience and understanding. That was her real legacy. Not the impossible shot that silenced a crowd, but the quiet excellence that inspired a generation. Comment, I'll live kindly if you believe every good person deserves to be remembered. Not everyone gets heard, not everyone gets chosen, but accuracy, justice, doesn't come from words. It comes from action. Lynn didn't shoot to prove herself. She shot because the silence had lasted too long. This story isn't just about hitting a target. It's about people who are misjudged but stay decent, waiting for the right moment. Sometimes all you need is one opportunity and the quiet confidence to take it. In a world that rewards the loudest voices, be like Lan. Work quietly, improve constantly, and when your moment comes, don't hesitate. Your shot might not split a coin in midair, but it might split open people's assumptions about what you're capable of. Excellence doesn't need an audience. Skill doesn't require permission. And sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is the one you make without saying a word. Stay quiet, stay ready, stay excellent. And when they finally give you the chance to show what you can do, make it count, because some shots can't be taken twice. Comment, she spoke through action, if this story will stay with you.